The next speaker I will be proud to introduce. That will be yours truly. Very brief introduction, qualified to speak on this subject, written 10 books on it, and have a doctorate in philosophy of science. And we've been talking about this throughout the last 2 days, really. But we've been hitting at the angle that I'm going to be touching upon in this talk in various ways. The problem is the loss of faith. The problem is especially the loss of faith among millennials. And as if the Pew survey, in 2016 still reflects reality, which I think it does, we're going to lose about 41% of our young people between the ages of about 15 to 35. So right in that region, if they're church-going Catholics or church-going Christians, they will leave the church and belief in God by the time they're 35 years old. The two statistics I want to just concentrate on are, number one, reason. This is 50% of the 41%. The number one reason they are leaving, most of them exclusively for this reason, is a perceived contradiction between faith and science. A perceived contradiction between faith and science. It's a complete myth. Has to be redressed. The second reason, affecting about 19% of those sampled, is they do not believe that suffering has any intrinsic value, and they can't see why an all-loving God would allow suffering if he has the power to overcome it or prevent it. Those are our big challenges. If we can get around that, then we can get to what Cardinal Muller was talking about today. We can basically move from intellectual conversion right here, resolve their problems where they are. Number two, then move to spiritual conversion, and then finally to moral conversion. But if you're not going to get them to move to moral conversion if you're not going to get some kind of a relationship with God or trust in God, and that's really not going to happen unless you've got these problems solved. There's the challenge that exists before us. What I'd like to do is give you a kaleidoscope of images of the way the Magis Center has chosen to do this. So I hope I'm feeding you, but I'm also going to tell you at the end of the program about what I call CredibleCatholic.com, completely free, downloadable program of voiceover PowerPoints that will give this information in 7 90-minute videos that can be shown in any confirmation class or any catechetics class. We're currently working with 78 archdioceses and dioceses to fully deploy this in every confirmation class, catechetical class, and if possible, as many high schools as we can get in that diocese. 78 out of 190, only 40%. Help us get into your diocese. It's all free, including the training. We'll come out and do it. We'll come out and train diocesan directors, parish directors, confirmation. It's free. We gotta turn this problem around. Let's get to the evidence. Why is the faith and science contradiction a complete myth? I'm just going to give you 4 out of 6 important points that I think will seal the case. We have seen it work. Our beta tests in Austin, Texas, in Los Angeles, and in New York City show a 97% response rate to this. So people view it as positive or very positive for fending off their doubts, maintaining their faith. 97% say they even, 97% say they would stop the thought of literally diving over the agnostic edge by looking at this curriculum. Many of them willing to share it with their friends. Number 1, God in the New Physics. Just finished a big article for a Macmillan book called Theism and Atheism. I was doing the topic on fine-tuning. I can tell you this right now. The physics evidence favors God. The physics evidence favors an intelligent creator. Let's just go through a quick sampler of this very quickly with you. Number one, there are two really excellent proofs of a beginning. The first one is a space-time geometry proof called the Borda-Vilenkin and Guth proof. Comes from three physicists, Arvind Borda at the University of California, Santa Barbara, Alexander Vilenkin, director of the Institute of Cosmology at Tufts University, and Alan Guth, who has the chair of cosmology at MIT and is the father of inflationary theory and a variety of other really important theories. In short, the proof is not constructed by dummies. These guys are number one physicists out there. What does it show? It shows that any universal or even multiversal construction that has an expansion rate greater than 0 must have a beginning. A beginning, as we'll see in a moment, is really important. It can actually give an important clue to a creator that is required for our universe. Now, I can't go through the proof with you right now. It's just too long. But the key thing that I want you to see is every single universal or multiversal construction that attaches to our universe, every one of them has an average expansion rate greater than 0. Our universe is absolutely expanding, has an average expansion rate greater than 0. So it must have a beginning according to BVG, Borda, Vilenkin, and Guth. Similarly, every multiverse must be inflationary. It too must have, therefore, an expansion rate greater than 0. And if it has an expansion rate greater than 0, then it too must have a beginning. And finally, all of these very esoteric theories about nucleating, higher dimensional, string theoretical space-time configurations, all of them, every single one of them has an expansion rate greater than 0. So according to BVG, they must have a beginning too. And that is important for our kids and for all of us to know. Because the likelihood is, whether we're just our universe, we're in a multiverse, or in some esoteric higher dimensional space string theory universe, whatever it may be, we had a beginning. There's a second really important kind of evidence from entropy. Can't go into it right now, but entropy is exceedingly important because it really is a measure of what's called disorder. And the main thing to remember about entropy is you need what we'll call order, that is to say disequilibrium, in order to have work potential in the universe. A universe can't do anything if it's at maximum entropy, if it's at maximum what we call thermodynamic equilibrium. So essentially, you can measure entropy. And if a universe has been around for an infinite amount of time, that universe or multiverse is going to be at thermodynamic equilibrium, which means that it is deader than dead and can't do anything and is just a little bit above 0 degrees Kelvin. That's not our universe. In fact, any multiverse that could give rise to our universe is not just above 0 degrees Kelvin. We've got lots of work energy out there. And there's suns burning and planets being formed and physicists thinking about it. Energy, energy, energy. What does that mean? Our universe has not been around for an infinite amount of time, or any multiverse out of which we could have been spawned. Well, what does that mean? Well, if it hasn't been around for an infinite amount of time, then it's only been around for a finite amount of time. And if it's been around for a finite amount of time, it must have had a beginning. Now you have a confluence of two really important physical, and they're different. They're different physical theories, physical laws which apply to universes and multiverses. And both of them say, we had a beginning. What's so important about a beginning? I've talked with you about this before, but in brief, our kids should know it. Very simply, if you have a beginning in physics, it's a beginning of space and time, a beginning of physical space and time. Now, if that's the case, then prior to that beginning, the universe, or if we're talking about a multiverse was nothing. That reality was nothing. What's the only thing that nothing can do? Nothing, because it's nothing. Nothing can't do anything. From nothing, only nothing can come, as the song has told us. And that is very good sense. Now, here's the problem. If the universe or multiverse or physical reality itself prior to the beginning was nothing, then it couldn't have moved itself from nothing to something. It couldn't have moved itself from nothing to something because it was nothing and could only do nothing. Therefore, something else would have had to have moved the universe or multiverse from nothing to something before its beginning. And that something else would have to transcend physical reality, whether it be in a universe or a multiverse. That transcendent reality would have to have the power to create the universe or the multiverse, or even a multiverse of multiverses, would have to be able to create it ab initio, from nothing, ex nihilo. And that reality we call a creator. This is kind of a quick synopsis of Alexander Vilenkin's conclusion after looking at the entropy evidence. Alexander Vilenkin is one of the BVG guys. He's the Vilenkin guy, the V guy. And so Vilenkin put it this way back in 2006, which still pertains today. And of course, more physicists than ever are subscribing to it today. He said, a good argument will convince a reasonable person, but a proof will convince even an unreasonable one. Well, now that the proof is in place, what proof? The Borda-Vilenkin-Guth proof plus the entropy evidence. Now that the proof is in place, cosmologists are just astrophysicists that study the beginning of the universe, etc., and the cosmos as a whole. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind even the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They must confront the reality of a beginning. And if a beginning, then a beginning of time. And if a beginning of physical time, then prior to that time, the universe, multiverse, physical reality was nothing, meaning that some transcendent reality with the capacity to create had to throw the entire universe or multiverse into reality ex nihilo. That's where we are in physics. Kids have a right to know. Just saying. Number two, the second thing that's really important is fine-tuning. So I said, I just finished boy, you don't want to read that article. But anyway, big article on fine-tuning. And I would just give you a summary of this, right now. A universe or a multiverse, if just created at random, without special conditions, what we call initial conditions, and without special values of the constants, no way would it have the capacity to bring about a life form. I mean, the odds of this happening are infinitesimally small. And why is that? I'll just give you a few examples, things our kids need to know. Remember, this is just a kaleidoscope. If you want the real thing, as we'll talk about in just a moment, you would go to crediblecatholic.com. That's a Magis Center website, and all you'd have to do is click on the 7 essential modules, but more on that in a moment. Right now, the kaleidoscope. Here's just a few examples, and you can get the point. One of the things, as I just said, that you really need in order to have a life form in the universe is low entropy. If you don't have low entropy, then you're not going to get a life form because there's not enough work energy for a life form to develop, let alone to evolve. So what are the odds of the low entropy of our universe at the Big Bang? Roger Penrose, a very famous physicist at Oxford, calculated it at 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 123 to 1 against. That is a double exponent. The odds of having low entropy, so necessary for the development of a life form, at the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, the odds of this happening are the same as a monkey typing the entire corpus of Shakespeare by random tapping of the keys in a single try. That's the case. The odds of getting a universe ready for life are the same as that monkey typing the entire corpus of Shakespeare perfectly by random tapping of the keys in a single try. Our kids have a right to know this. Let's take just a couple of other examples. You cannot alter the constants. 20 constants in our universe. These are numbers that affect all the laws of physics. They're called constants. And the reason they're constants is because they're the same everywhere. They're constant yesterday and today and tomorrow. They're constant here, there, and everywhere. So we call them constants because they affect universal laws. Now, I'll tell you a few of these constants. If you just altered one of these 20 constants, actually, let's take two, the gravitational force constant and the weak force constant, and you just altered those two constants by 1 part in 10 to the 50, that's a decimal point, 49 zeros and a 1. A really teeny fraction, so teeny, you can't imagine. If you, that's it, up or down. You make that constant higher or lower by just 0.0001, then you're going to get a universe that, I'm not kidding, this is absolutely true, a universe that will be continuously exploding in its expansion, which, by the way, is very bad for life forms. Or you're going to get a universe, on the other hand, that collapses into a black hole. And when it collapses into a black hole, the black hole is going to have almost infinite crushing capacity at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, which is also exceedingly bad for all life forms. What's my point? You mean we avoided complete devastation of all life forms by 1 part in 10 to the 50th just in these two constants, the gravitational force constant and weak force constant at the Big Bang? Yep. The values of the constants just happen to be that. Do you know the odds of that hit happening by pure chance? You got it. Monkey typing Shakespeare. But we somehow got there. Just two more examples and you'll get the point. If you altered, there's some more constants coming, the mass of the proton, the mass of the electron, or the electromagnetic charge relative to the gravitational force by 1 part in 10 to the 39. That's a decimal point, 38 zeros and a 1. 0.0001. If you took any of those three constants and altered them by that little fraction, either up or down, every single star in our universe would have either been a blue giant or a red dwarf. If every star in our universe was a blue giant, it would have been a big, huge, exploding star, a huge chunk of galaxy worth of star that would be very, very hot indeed, frying everything in its proximity. This would be exceedingly bad for all life forms because everything everywhere would be incinerated. So that's not good. On the other hand, if every star in the entire universe were a red dwarf, that would be equally bad because everything would freeze. There wouldn't be enough energy to have anything happen on a molecular or biological level at all, which is exceedingly bad for life forms. You mean we avoided complete travesty for life by 1 part in 10 to the 39th, higher or lower, in the electromagnetic charge, the mass of the proton, the mass of the electron relative to the gravitational force constant? Yep. Do you know the odds of this happening by pure chance, the constants getting the precise values they have at the Big Bang by pure chance? Monkey typing Shakespeare. Correct. let's get to the next thing. Just last example. If you took the strong nuclear force coupling constant and you just upped that baby just 2%, or for that matter, lowered it 2%, you wouldn't have a chance for life, at least that was carbon-based. Let's suppose we moved the strong nuclear force coupling constant up 2% from the value it just happened to have at the Big Bang. There wouldn't be any hydrogen in the universe. If there were no hydrogen in the universe, then there wouldn't be any stars burning. There would be no nuclear fusion in those stars. And the universe would be a very cold place, which would be freezing and very bad for life forms. Moreover, you wouldn't have any water either. Alternatively, if you just lowered that strong nuclear force coupling constant by a mere 2%, there wouldn't be any other element on the entire periodic table heavier than hydrogen. You'd have an entire universe of hydrogen. Go ahead, make a life form from hydrogen alone. You can't do it. Complete disaster. Do you know the odds of getting the strong nuclear force coupling constant? Well, it's not a monkey typing Shakespeare, but it's a monkey typing Macbeth by random tapping of the keys in a single try. What's my point? My point is, we seem to be really, really, really lucky against all odds. Our universe, I mean, we're talking, when you compound all the, what we call cosmic coincidences, anthropic coincidences, when you compound all those things, it's like 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 123 to 1. So you got to add another exponent in that baby just to get the odds against life in our universe by the constants and initial conditions by random chance at the Big Bang. Do you know what that number amounts to? A monkey typing the entire corpus of English literature by random tapping of the keys in a single try. Let's call our universe a very fortunate universe, just for a second. And now we got to ask the question, how did those constants and initial conditions actually come to be the way they were against all the odds? There are only a one-off pure chance, monkey typing Shakespeare and corpus of the English language. I doubt it. That's not going to work. So that leaves us with basically two causes that are proffered today by physicists. The number one is a multiverse, of course, where you get trillions upon trillions upon trillions of bubble universes, where you might be able to get a one-off chance amidst 10 to the 10 to the 10 to the 123 to 1 bubble universes. You can do it. You could probably get one like ours. As Paul Davies once described it, well, that's like bringing excess baggage to cosmic proportions. He was talking about Occam's razor. But the real problem with the multiverse is every multiverse model must have fine-tuning too. Every multiverse cannot be at thermodynamic equilibrium. It has to start at some low entropy condition, which is totally against the odds. And every multiverse, furthermore, has to have fine-tuning, because you can't just have bubble universes helter-skelter emerging in the multiverse. That won't work, because then their gravitational fields start interfering with one another. And when you get the gravitational fields of universes interfering with one another, wow, that's what you call a maximum gravitational perturbation. Those whole universes are shaking like jellos. And of course, this is exceedingly bad for the development of life forms. So you got to postulate design in the multiverse, meaning, to explain the fine-tuning of the multiverse, which means you only bring the fine-tuning problem back one step to the multiverse instead of our universe. What's my point? I believe that the most probable and likely example, the most probable reason why you can be the universe has a condition that will give rise to life. The very most probable reason is it's designed by an intelligent, conscious intelligence. That's the reason. And I think a very good and plausible case can be made for that with the best philosophical and the best physical arguments today. That's what this article was about. And I must tell you, I think it goes really beyond just reasonable and responsible evidence. I think there's a great deal of probative force for a conscious, intelligent designer that transcends our universe, a multiverse, or any physical reality. Put the three things together. Our kids ought to know that there's a beginning which implies a creator. Our kids ought to know that there's so much fine-tuning in this universe, or a multiverse that could give rise to this universe, so much fine-tuning required for life that it implies, again, a cosmic, a transphysical intelligence outside of our universe. Put the two together. We have an implication of a creator, an implication of a designer that is fine-tuning all the constants of our universe. You put it together, and it sounds pretty close to God to me. That's where physics is. And we can't allow ourselves to be bullied by people who are sometimes very malicious atheists, but don't have a leg to stand on. We know Victor Stenger wrote a book called The Fallacy of Fine-Tuning. And, if you just want to, if you have a little physics background, and you would need it, you got to read this response by Luke Barnes, where he responds to it in actually an Astrophysics journal. But nevertheless, he responds to this book by at one point saying, in order to make this work, Victor Stenger actually had to equivocate in his fundamental argument, and moreover had to kind of twist and turn the laws of physics into something which really doesn't exist. The errors he makes in physics, says Barnes, are sophomoric. Now, we got good grounds, good physicists, people who are really showing the probative force of these arguments. Our kids deserve to know. But it goes much further than that. Oh, God has just given us a plethora of evidence to give to people who are skeptical for logical and scientific reasons. We've got evidence. Let's go to a second big body of evidence. I'm just going to go through it really quickly with you. I think the studies of near-death experiences and terminal lucidity are very probative. Many of you have heard my talks on near-death experiences before, but I think they're very good studies. The Samuel Parnia study from the University of Southampton in 2014 with the 2,060 patients that were tested. The Van Lommel study reported in Britain's #1 medical journal, The Lancet, etc. All these studies show the high likelihood that you have a transphysical soul. Yep, the church was right all along. Yep. Science has not disproven a soul. Looks like the latest medical studies of near-death experiences show that we do have a soul. I'm not going to go into all the evidence, just want to talk about two things very quickly. The first thing is there are a lot of the people who have literally left their body. And when they leave their body, their consciousness has left their physical body and their physical brain. Obviously, the full origin of consciousness cannot be the physical brain. They are literally outside of their bodies, looking down, very conscious, seeing 360 degrees around them, right? And not just seeing where their eyes are pointing, hearing, defying physical laws, moving up and down, gravity, no problem, going through walls, no problem. And while they're out there tripping around, in their what I'll call just their spiritual body for a second, because or their ensouled body or consciousness, you just get the sense that these people should be able to report things that are out there. And as I've talked about before, people have reported all kinds of things, from tennis shoes that are on the third floor ledge outside the hospital with the shoelace tucked under the heel and a well-worn toe to, Mr. So-and-so, we lost your dentures. No, you didn't. When I was dead, I saw the nurse with the red hair take the dentures right out of my mouth, and I was looking at the whole scene. She opened up this drawer underneath the machine that looks just like this, threw it in there. If you go down to the OR and just open it up, my dentures will be there. And there they are, right? But the real kicker, the real way you can know this isn't a hallucination. Don't let anyone tell you these studies can be explained by a hallucination, because this is very relevant to me. 81% of blind people, most of whom were blind from birth, see for the first time when they're clinically dead. They literally are out of their bodies. They've never seen before in their lives. And they're giving complete descriptions of I was looking at this scene outside the hospital, went right through the hospital walls. It was snowing out there, and I saw the little trolley tracks, and I saw the trolley disappearing in the distance, and the trees that looked like this and looked like that on both sides of the train tracks. And how'd you know that exactly if you're blind? How did you get any sense at all of spatial perspective? Here's the deal, everyone. A hallucination has to come from your brain. But a brain needs prior data. So if you're going to have a hallucination, you got to have a visual image in your brain already to hallucinate. Blind people can't have, blind from birth, can't have hallucinations of visual images in the same way we do, and certainly not to report accurate, verifiable data. 81% of blind people, most of whom are blind from birth, can see when they're clinically dead. You tell me how this happens unless exactly what they report, that they're leaving their bodies, etc., going right out of there, seeing, hearing, remembering, conscious, right out of their bodies. They're looking down upon everything. And by the way, they report moving into, most of the time into a heavenly domain. Some of the time they move into a very unpleasant domain. But most of the time, the vast majority of the time, they move to a heavenly domain. Now, 85% of the time, children who undergo clinical death experience a near-death experience. They go to a heaven-like place where they will see Jesus or something. Whereas only 20% of adults will have a near-death experience who undergo clinical death. And people say, well, why do you think that is? And I just think this is not the time that God is going to judge those people. So if they're kind of purgatory bound, or if they have stuff they still have to do before the judgment can occur in their freedom, they're not going to have a near-death experience. But if they are ready, moving either toward heaven or moving in sometimes the other direction, they will have that experience. Believe me, the ones who move in the other direction, they have a strong intent to change their lives when they return. The point I'm trying to get to, though, is this is really very good evidence. The kids look at it and they go, well, how do you explain that? I say, how do you explain that? And they go, is it really true? You kind of have a soul? Do you think? Otherwise, you couldn't have done all these things. And of course, as I said, yeah, the church was right. We were made in the image and likeness of God, and we do have a transphysical soul, and I think the odds are there. Terminal lucidity, great studies. These terminal lucidity studies, right? I think some of you may not know what it is. Terminal lucidity is a state where most of the time it's about an hour before death, but sometimes it can be as much as a week before death. A person who has severe atrophying of the brain, maybe Alzheimer's for 7, 8, 9 years, or severe dementia, or has been very, very mentally challenged during their lifetime, or had hydrocephalus or something of that nature, right? Water on the brain, where about 90% of the brain is turned into water for spinal fluid, whereas the brain is kind of crushed up to the top of the skull. All of these things would prohibit what we would call normal conscious functioning. And you can document this on MRIs. Now, during this time, these patients will wake up 1 hour before death and go, I got to do all these things. I want to arrange for my funeral. I'm pretty close to death. And they're speaking lucidly, like they haven't done for 6, 7, 8 years. And they're sitting there just as wide awake as you could possibly be. And as they're wide awake, sitting there, they're arranging funeral things. They're telling people, I did this or that. Or, I actually heard you in my room. Don't speak badly of the dead, or the people you think might be out of it, right? And they may be hearing everything you're saying. And, of course, or they're actually, functioning in intellectual ways that they never had before with linguistic capacities that they haven't had for a dozen years. How does it happen? We don't know. Their brain is atrophied. What's doing the thinking? I would submit it has the same source as near-death experiences. You have a transphysical consciousness or a soul. And that's what's doing the thinking. And that's what's working through all of the various, capacities in your lower brain to produce speech. That's what's actually taking place. And if that's the case, you are not just a bunch of atoms and molecules. You are an ensouled, transphysically ensouled, transcendent entity that is made to inherit the kingdom of God. And that's worth telling our kids. Will this kind of evidence work? In a 90-minute video where you actually have video clips that are embedded into there with all of these patients who are talking, including young people their age who are talking, who are blind from birth, who are actually describing the scenes that they saw. It works. It absolutely works. Not to give the 7 essential modules to our kids in a confirmation class is a crime. They're crying for it. If you don't give them a ground, if you don't give them intellectual conversion, how are we going to expect them in this kind of a world where they're just getting literally kicked in the social media by new atheism and a variety of other things? They're getting kicked in school by, we just heard 2 talks on this, by kind of a radical secularism that's in the public schools. How do we expect them to maintain their faith? They need evidence that's here. All you have to do is literally click on a thing called 7 Essential Modules. Click on near-death experiences and hit the space bar. So simple. Okay, let me go to the third area. This is, again, really important. Kids need hard empirical evidence that has been tested validly by science. I'm just going to give you the Shroud of Turin in real brief detail. If you want to know more about it, I think I'm doing one at 8:30 tomorrow in Carneros H, Salon H. But in the meantime, this is the brief thing. Number one, the 1988 carbon dating, bogus. Ray Rogers proved essentially through the sample, there was one sample only taken from the cloth. That sample was split into 3 parts. The sample was taken from a part of the cloth that does not represent the rest of the linen cloth. How can we be so sure of that? Because from that exact region on the cloth where the sample was taken, the cloth manifests cotton fibrils. The entire cloth is linen. It is not cotton. The cotton fibrils are manifest through 5 different thermal chemical testing. Dr. Ray Rogers, who is the head editor for Thermochemica, the peer-reviewed medical journal Thermochemica, just says unqualifiedly, this sample did not come from the linen of the rest of the Shroud of Turin. It came from a patch of cloth that was sewn together after the fire of Chambéry in 1548. Some nuns sewed the spots that were damaged together, and that was where they took the fiber from, the sample for the carbon dating. Now you might be thinking, gee, that sounds intentional. I don't want to accuse anybody, of doing something intentionally that would try to render this bogus, but I must tell you, very suspicious. Okay, here's my thought. We've got a bunch of other tests now. I'm just going to tell you. Pardon? Oh, we have, first of all, Fourier transformed infrared spectroscopy. We have also Raman laser spectroscopy. We have a mechanical tension and compressibility test. All of them point to a dating around 50 AD, plus or minus 150 years, with 95% confidence level. It comes right around the time of Jesus. Not only that, you got coins in this man's eyes. They put coins on his eyes to keep his eyelids shut. And those Roman coins that are on that man's eyes just happen to come from a minting in 29 AD by Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem. They're unique, enigmatic Roman leptons that have 4 enigmas in them that only came from that dating. We've looked for every coin, numismatically, throughout the entire world, and all we found is coins with an origin with that minting by Pontius Pilate in 29 AD that exactly resemble the coins on the man's eyes in the shroud. And then the sudarium of Oviedo, the face cloth of Jesus. Okay. There are 128 bloodstains on that, on the sudarium. This is the face cloth that was wrapped around Jesus, and in John's gospel, we hear that the shroud is over here, but the face cloth is rolled up in a separate place by itself. That's the face cloth. That face cloth has 128 bloodstains, no image like the Shroud of Turin does. But those 128 bloodstains, from being wrapped around that face, they resemble the Shroud of Turin perfectly. That means, do you know the odds against having 128 similar, fragmented, completely irregular blood stains being precisely the same without those 2 claws having touched the same face? Yeah, pretty close to monkey, but not quite. Maybe a monkey typing a good John Donne poem. But yeah, pretty high odds against. Now what my contention is, of course they touch the same face, but the provenance of the sudarium of Oviedo goes back to the 600s. How could the Shroud of Turin be, come from 1500, as the 1988 carbon dating showed? How could this happen when, of course, it had to touch the same face as a cloth that came from 600 and probably came from the same time as the shroud, 50 AD? Odds are it didn't come from 1500. Bogus carbon dating. Don't let anyone tell you that that carbon dating is valid. It is not. It's pretty certain now this cloth came from around 50 AD. Let's get to the point. I can't explain all the evidence, but when the kids hear the evidence for the resurrection on the cloth, by the way, there's a perfect testimony. If you want a perfect testimony to the accuracy of the gospel accounts of Jesus' passion, all you got to do is read Pierre Barbet's book, A Doctor at Calvary. This surgeon from Paris actually puts together the entire crucifixion event and actually shows that the spear that plunged into the side of that man came from a Roman pilum. Actually shows that the whips that were used resembled the whips of the Roman legionnaires with the bone chips at the end of the 3-pronged whip. It goes right down to that kind of detail, exactly as the gospel accounts portray the crucifixion. But the really, really good thing that I talked about last year at this talk is the resurrection evidence that's on that shroud. And all of our kids deserve to hear this resurrection evidence. Because the only way you can produce this image, which is just on the very uppermost part of the fibrils of that cloth, just on the very edge of it, it never penetrates to the medulla of the fibrils or even to the middle of the cloth. Never. And so it couldn't have been produced by a vapor, couldn't have been produced by a liquid, couldn't have been produced by scorching. The only way you're going to get it is with light energy. And I'm just going to tell you how the light energy got there. It had to get there through 6 to 8 billion watts of light energy delivered for no longer than 1/40 billionth of a second. That's the way you turn a non-photographically sensitive cloth into a perfect three-dimensional photographic negative image. And of course, once you do that, you got to ask, how does a dead body produce, 6 to 8 with a billion watts of light energy for 1/40 billionth of a second? It exceeds all the laser capacity we have in the world today. It would take 14,000 excimer ARF lasers in laboratory conditions to produce that image on that cloth. That's really unusual for dead bodies to do. And this means that there isn't any physical explanation we know of at all. Nothing close to doing this. However, in the gospel accounts, there's something very significant. And the gospel accounts say, that he's transformed. He's spiritually transformed, right? That, the transfiguration accounts that say he's transformed in light, which prefigures, of course, this resurrection in glory that the apostles have seen. Yeah, he was. And not only that, by the way, the cloth had to penetrate that body and go inside the body so that these bones and in the rib cage and in the hands can be perfectly three-dimensionally proportioned, right, to the surface of the body. So we got a body that becomes, transphysical. It becomes spiritual. And it's giving off 6 to 8 billion watts of light energy, which seems to require a supernatural cause. Let's just call it God, who's telling us that he has, literally, his son has been raised from the dead in glory. And the evidence is right there emblazoned in that cloth. Does this make a difference to our kids? Absolutely. You should see the comments that are written from these kids in our high schools in New York and Austin. They're just going, whoa, I never heard this before. But if this is really true, and I mean, it's really true. You can read all these studies. Read, ladies and not you, ladies and gentlemen, but read, boys and girls, read this evidence. Go click right on to crediblecatholic.com and go to the real articles. You want the studies? We got the studies. Jesus is risen in glory. Let's get to the fourth area. Yesterday I gave a talk on 20th century contemporary validated miracles. And I'm not going to go into that, but I'll tell you, miracles speak volumes. Because they're empirically based and because they're scientifically validatable, you got to give these kids raw meat. And essentially what they need is the ones that are really tested, really have got the documentation before and after, have panels of scientists and physicians who really have assessed this and come up with no known natural explanation. To make a long story short, I took the image of Our Lady of Fatima yesterday and what's in the eyes of Our Lady, plus the tilma itself, the materials. This is very impressive. But of course, the Lourdes miracles, particularly Marie Bailey, right, who had a completely distended tubercular peritonitis condition with a distended abdomen going out several 8 inches, literally, gets water poured on her stomach, on her abdomen, and the entire tumor shrinks completely within 30 minutes without discharge. We have really excellent evidence. Alexis Carrel, who received a Nobel Prize for his work in vascular surgery, etc., was the witness to the Marie Bailey miracle. And it literally was the initiation of his conversion. Well, this other guy, John Taylor, where we had a guy who was just completely sprayed with machine gun bullets in World War I, had literally a hole in his temple with completely right through to the brain. You could see his throbbing brain. He had his entire arm was turned into a skeleton, right? No tendons or muscles at all. Epileptic fits every 15 minutes. Goes to Lourdes, literally on his deathbed. And while he's sitting there in the bath, after he gets a Eucharistic blessing, right, after he's been in the baths, this guy gets up out of the old gurney and on his own goes, eats a solid meal, and then proceeds to kneel in front of the statue of Our Lady in the grotto to thank her for his cure. And everybody's going, but that guy for 15 years was a complete invalid with a hole in his skull. No more hole in his skull. Bone completely remedied. Just a little bit of a scar tissue on the skin. Nothing left. The same thing with the skeletal arm, the muscles, the tendons, all returned to normal. No more epileptic fits. As one doctor described it, very unusual indeed. In fact, we have no medical precedent for this because dead tissue is dead, and it doesn't return to life unless, of course, you transplant it or something, but that technology was not available in 1931. There are a myriad of other miracles that are present. The Eucharistic miracle is the one that really gets the kids. I just beg of you, just go to the Eucharistic miracle in module number 4, if you would, because as we'll see in a moment, these miracles all pertain to the Catholic Church in just a moment. But that Eucharistic miracle, overseen by Archbishop Bergoglio, is really important. The kids are looking at this, and essentially a desecrated host was put into a tabernacle that, and to dissolve in water. The host actually doesn't just get a blood stain on it. The host turns into a piece of tissue. And the tissue was around for 3 years without any decomposition. Everything is photographed and documented because Archbishop Bergoglio, now Pope Francis, insisted on it. So upon seeing this, they decided to take a sliver of the tissue, send it anonymously to the #1 pathology lab. And I do have that pathology report. Anybody who wants it can just write to moducenter.com and get it, but it's not on the website. But that pathology report shows that that tissue came from the left ventricle wall near the region of the valves of the heart, and that there are white blood cells embedded in the wall of that heart. Those white blood cells that are in there, white blood cells die when the heart dies, when the body dies. But there is a multitude of white blood cells in the wall of this heart, and the only way white blood cells are going to burrow their way into a heart is if a person is being tormented. Now here's the deal. How did the multitude of white blood cells survive? There's only one way, said the pathologist. He said, it's if you removed the tissue from the man while he was still alive and his heart was beating. So I always put out the question to the kids. Do you think that the Catholic Church would actually take a human being, torment them, beat them around the chest, then open them up and take a chunk of heart tissue right out of his beating heart while he's still alive, thereby killing him in order to fake a Eucharistic miracle? If not, you may want to believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. By the by, that tissue is AB positive blood type, the precise blood type found on the Shroud of Turin, as well as on the Sudarium of Oviedo. Just saying. What's the point of all of this? The point is, these miracles all point to the Catholic Church's controversial doctrines. Yes, there are many miracles that we have in our lives, right, that occur, and many of them have been tested, that are not concerned with Jesus or with Mary or with the saints. By the way, I have a whole bunch of saints' miracles as well for St. John Paul, for Padre Pio, etc., that were used for their canonizations and beatifications. But that's too much for today. The main point that is clear is, what are the 3 basic doctrines that everybody's criticizing the Catholic Church for? Marian devotion, and boy, there is so much evidence from Lourdes and Fatima and from Guadalupe that it's just overwhelming. I do not, and it's really good scientifically validated stuff. The second is there's tons of great evidence for these saints, and praying through the intercessory prayer through the saints, that comes from not one but two medical examinations by at least 9 doctors or scientists after the fact. There's 2 commissions, one for the Diocesan Commission, one for the Roman Commission. And of course, this has been documented again. It has to be immediate. It has to be enduring, etc. And then you get to the point where you're at the Eucharist, and especially the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Frankly, I don't see how anybody could possibly interpret John 6 in any other way. I mean, how do you interpret that passage as not intending the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist? But if Scripture is not good enough, take a good Eucharistic miracle and look at that pathology report. And that's what may speak to the kids. And I'll just say one thing. Once we're done with this, in that module, we literally take Jesus' investiture of Peter as the head of the church, having the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and that the jaws of hell will never prevail against it. It speaks volumes. Feed these kids with evidence. 2 other things that we bring into the fore in this series. And I want to talk just a second about the series. The number one thing is that 4 levels of happiness. Many of you have heard this talk before, but you know that the 4 levels of happiness talk about meaning and purpose in life and how to help the kids move from level 1, which is pleasure, level 2, which is ego-comparative identity and purpose in life, how to help them move to level 3, which is contributive or love, and level 4, which is faith and transcendence. Why do we do this? How do we do this? We do it because we tell them about the comparison game. We tell them what happens when you live for level 1 pleasure and level 2 ego comparative advantage. Who's achieving more? Who's achieving less? Who's got more power? Who's got less power? Who's more beautiful? Who's less beautiful? Who's more intelligent? Who's less intelligent? Who's got more status? Who's less status? Who's got less status? Who's more popular? Who's less popular? Who's winning? Who's losing? All the time, every single bit of the time, jealousy, fear of failure, fear of loss of esteem, inferiority, superiority, ego sensitivities to the max, self-pity, and of course, ego rage, ego blame, and depression. I'll just give you, we end our module on the 4 levels just with this report of Dervick and so forth that was reported in the American Psychiatric Association in 2004. This is a major longitudinal study comparing non-religious people with religious people, religiously affiliated people. Non-religiously affiliated people have up to 3 times, 4 times greater rates of suicide, suicide attempts, impulsivity, aggressivity, depression, malaise, substance abuse, and familial tensions than people who are religiously affiliated. This is in the American Journal of Psychiatry from the American Psychiatric Association. But it sounds like Augustine to me. For thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Everything that Cardinal Muller was talking about today. Right there, the natural condition of human beings to be made for God, to be living for salvation, to be proceeding toward transcendence, because we are transcendent. We do have a soul. That we're given the church. We're given the Blessed Virgin Mary. We're given the Holy Eucharist. We're given the intercession of the saints, right? And so we go to the last thing. Can't explain it very much right now. But why would an all-loving God allow suffering? It's the final bullet right into the thing, right? Where we just say, look, the myth that, if God were loving, He would not allow suffering is just simply not true. Suffering brings the best out in us. Challenge brings us, up out of our ash. Yes, of course suffering's tragic. Of course as Christians we have to respond to suffering. Of course, we want to help each other in our times of suffering, which is the moment of compassio, to suffer with. There is an incredible dignity in suffering. And what we have to do is step by step explain what the dignity of suffering is to these kids so that they can see that the ultimate goal of moving through suffering, being blind is not convenient. However, I must tell you, there are graces upon graces in that. And I get my consolation out of, the 2 Corinthians 12 where Paul says, hey, I was given a thorn in the flesh, an angel of Satan to keep me from getting proud. 3 times I asked the Lord to take this thorn from me. I asked, in other words, over and over and over again 1,000,000 times, but he saw fit not to do so. For in my weakness is my strength. As I grow weaker, Christ grows stronger within me. That suffering is leading him right to perfection and humility in love toward his salvation. And what we have to do is make that case crystal clear, and number 7 module does that. So I've been talking about these modules, let's just go to this right now. I'm begging you. It's all free of charge. Even the whole digital booklets, they're all free of charge. You just download them. It's confirmation teachers, just download it right onto your laptop, show it to your students. Of course, we're going through the archdioceses. Like I said, we're working with 78 archdioceses and dioceses now. However, any help you can give to bring it to your parish, to start demanding it from the bottom up, is going to help our kids. There are 7 modules in this set. What do? First, you go to crediblecatholic.com. Crediblecatholic, one word, .com. Then you'll see a big red button right in the middle when you get there. It's called 7 Essential Modules. Click it. Once you click it, you will see the 7 modules. One is on near-death experiences. One is on the evidence from physics for an intelligent creator. One is on the Shroud of Turin. One is on the miracles of Mary and the saints and the Eucharist and its implications for the Catholic Church. One's on the 4 levels of happiness, and one's on suffering. You can click them. They're 90 minutes each. They're voice-over PowerPoints. That means that the PowerPoint is read, and it's all graphically filled. There are embedded videos every step of the way that explain these concepts, near-death experience witnesses, that explain the fine-tuning with actual kinds of interesting little analogies and images, et cetera, of the universe. And of course, the evidence for the shroud is just stunning, the videos that are embedded in these voice-over PowerPoints. The only thing you have to do once the PowerPoint is loaded and you're showing it to a kid is hit the space bar. If you want to get, literally, the paper copy of the book, I believe it's now $6.50 for a 120-page book. It's all there. Got it. It's all there. I know the Mass is beginning right now, and I'm just asking you to please go to crediblecatholic.com and share this with every kid you know, with every adult you know who has a kid. Just one last thing, the text. We do, if you want to get all the latest stuff that we're doing at Magis, just simply go to 22828 and just put in Magis on your text Magis in. When you get there, it'll just ask for your email, and an email will be delivered to you on your personal email only once a week that will give you all the updates, interesting articles, things that are going on with the 7 modules, things that are even new forms of evidence that are coming true all the time. So anyway, I just thank you for your kind attention today, and I just ask you to continue to pray for us at the Magis Center, because we really need it, and God has been helping us. God knows. Thank you.